people can start losing weight just by making better decisions.
Motivation is driven from the inside out.
Use flexibility as a tool. Rely on structure when it's helpful.
This is where we discuss the possibilities.
Hi guys, I'm Joe Klemczewski, founder of The Diet Doc, here with Dr. Kori Propst, our Vice President and Wellness Director. And we have some amazing stuff that we want to cover in the next maybe couple of weeks. And even though today we're going to be in our category of motivational mastery, we're going to pull a little bit from some of the content we went through during our very recent annual conference. I'm still kind of wiping the sleep out of my eyes from recovering from the long weekend. But Kori, you started the entire conference off with a segment about strength-based coaching. And before we talk about that from a coaching perspective, and we may even do that in a couple days when we talk about fitness entrepreneurship, but today, for somebody who has not even heard that term, what is the whole process or the theory of being strength-based? What does that mean?
So let me start with just a quick, I'll be as concise as I can, a little bit of a background. You know, I started in mental health therapy in the early 2000s and was involved in using the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder. Let's just start there with that term, disorder. And while we all know what it's like to feel kind of disintegrated and discombobulated and confused and chaotic, it's not necessarily the most effective way of moving forward and carving a forward momentum building sort of a path by focusing on what's wrong and what the deficits are in us or in other human beings. And so strength-based coaching is really focused on an individual's capacities, strengths, character, traits that are resourceful and that have built-in resilience. So as coaches, we really find that an individual can move forward faster and with more confidence and more effectively when we are capitalizing on those internal and external resources. And as a therapist, when I got started, I was involved in evidence-based sort of a treatment protocols with the families I was working with. And it was all based on what do you currently have available within your family, within yourself, and within your environment that we can capitalize on to meet those improvement goals that you said are so important to you. That's what strength-based coaching really is about.
So if I'm being strength-based with myself, let's say I have a goal and I'm on day one of trying to accomplish this goal. It's to read a book a week. That's my new goal. Or to lose 10 pounds. That's my new goal. What's the difference? How would I not be strength-based versus what would I tell myself to be strength-based?
So it really does come down to understanding, I think maybe at a ground level, what you've accomplished in the past would be a really good place to reflect and how you've done that. What character strengths or traits have you put into place to have met that other goal for yourself? And then asking, how could I put those into place now and implement those with this current book reading goal or my weight loss goal? It's really a transfer of resources from one thing that you've done well to another thing that you're doing well. A non-strength-based approach would be thinking about everything that, and this is a piece that it's not something that we necessarily want to ignore, asking the question, what are all the things that could go wrong, to get to what are the barriers? But the ultimate sort of outcome for that question is, okay, if these are the potential barriers, how am I going to move past those or get over them or move through them? And it's the strengths that we have and the capacities and even the support people and things out in our environment that are going to help us do that. So what are you asking or saying to yourself? It's how can I best, most effectively manage this improvement goal utilizing my internal and external resources?
So do you think it's a good idea, just even coming in contact with maybe this concept for the first time,
Mm-hmm.
if I do have a goal, let's say my next semester is starting and I know I've got to make room in my schedule to do all of this stuff, and there are going to be challenges.
Yes.
Would you suggest saying, okay, how can I be strength-based about this? Maybe a pro and con column on a spreadsheet, or challenges and then how I'm going to meet them. How would you do that at the most gut level to make sure that you're using these concepts?
So yeah, I think that's a good sort of starting place. And you've mentioned that in another podcast too. I think your son sat down and made a pro and con list. That to me that's more sort of cerebral and intellectual, whereas the strengths sort of come from an embodied place. Like, I recognize that I'm a very curious person and I like to ask questions, and I also love to learn new things and have a sense of novelty in what I'm exploring and discovering. And so, one of the things that I would do to start off would be to have a sense of what my strengths are. Ask the question, what are my strengths? What are my values? Another way to get at that, because sometimes we're not very good at recognizing our own strengths, but we're really good at recognizing the strengths in other people. And so we might ask, what have other people said that I'm really good at, or that I excel at, or the parts of my personality that they really appreciate? Ask your friends, ask your family members. That's the place where I would start, to get that information. And then you can ask yourself, well, how could I put that into place with this goal? Especially in times when the challenge is high and when it feels very difficult.
So you bring up a great point about having some outside influence. And I have a story, I don't think I told you, about our conference. And I want to segue from that story into how you would help somebody do this for themselves. So I was in a conversation with Dr. Jennifer Soders, our medical director, and we were having a nice little conversation with one of our program owners. And as happened all weekend, we're in deep to a very specific conversation and a question about what this particular program owner feels that she needs to thrive. And here we are as a company with all of our top heavy hitters who have been in the company for a long time, or they've been in their flow for a great amount of their career. Other people are just getting started. Some are new program owners with us. So there's just a great mix of people. And as can happen, this particular owner is feeling a bit overwhelmed. Do I even fit into this place? There are so many phenomenal coaches and consultants here. And this is what Dr. Soders did that was so deft and perfect and almost stealthy. I just sat back in awe and was mentally taking notes of her conversation. As our program owner was asking and expressing some insecurities, Jen said, you know what? And she was leaning in, just everything was just beautiful. She said, when I watch you do your videos on this, I see so much passion in you and you're excited and I can tell you love that. And she continued to recognize in our owner those strengths and just let her guide herself in this conversation about how she could use those in other areas. So I think that's a tremendous example, but if I'm just sitting back lost, feeling frustrated, how can I do that for myself?
Well, I think you answered your own question, which is to reach out to the people who really know you best and to ask them, what would you do in this situation? If you can't reach out to someone, then it really literally can come down to asking yourself the question, what have I heard from other people in my life that I do well? That can feel very difficult, but that's one of the resources that we have inside of us that not a lot of people recognize, is that ability to recall situations in which we've been praised or we've been appreciated, or someone has said, wow, you're astonishing in this way. I don't feel like I have that capacity. That's what you did in that situation was so awesome. And so when those things happen, when we're in situations where we're receiving praise for our efforts or attitude or whatever it is, we need to be very deliberate about taking that in and absorbing it and making that mental note, like, remember this, Kori, remember this right now, what's happening, because we want to be able to draw upon that when we're in that space that you're talking about, just having a really difficult time. There were moments during the conference for me like that too, Joe, where it with Dr. Soders, actually, she's asking me a question about a deficit of hers, and just pointing out, the very fact, Jen, that you're asking me this question is really beautiful. The openness that you're exhibiting right now to understanding yourself better, I really admire and appreciate that. She's in this negative space, and now we're drawing her into this very open, spacious, appreciative space. I was just emailing a client before we got on here to do this podcast, and this is a new client. She actually signed up right before the conference started. And, I'm in my head thinking, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to be super attentive to her right away. I'm inundated, and have to focus on the conference. And so, I let her know ahead of time. I'm like, I'm going to be gone. Really, really appreciate your patience with this. But caught back up with her today, and she'd sent me all the paperwork and everything and her food logs that I'd asked for. And, I was just like, I'm really in awe about you right now. Can I just tell you how amazing I think you are that you did all this? I wasn't in communication with you. I appreciate all of this so much. Thank you for your patience as well. And she wrote back and she said, wow, I really appreciate the acknowledgement of my effort. She's like, I'm working on giving myself more credit. And so it's not just learning our own strengths to be able to implement in times of difficulty. It's as coaches doing this, we are actually teaching our clients how to do it for themselves, and we're models for it. It's very powerful.
Yeah, you mentioned something about negativity. Like Jen asked you a question that expressed a little bit of a negative emotion. And that was going to be my question, is in the face of this kind of new information for somebody, I've never heard of strength-based mindset, strength-based coaching, strength-based anything. Do I know that I need that if I'm just anxious about a goal, or if I'm negative, if I think, well, here I go again, I'm going to try and do this, but I always fail? I mean, what's that impetus where you just know this is exactly why I need some kind of a strength-based shift?
So I think it comes down to the embodied experience of it. I've mentioned this before. No, we can get locked into intellectualizing things very easily, intellectualizing emotion. We experience an emotion and then we're like, why am I having that? What does this mean? Instead of letting our bodies guide us. And let me kind of break that down for you so it makes some sort of sense. When an experience of a negative emotion takes place, we will typically, if we're attuned to what's occurring below the neck, we'll be attuned to whether we feel open, whether we feel like a spaciousness, whether we feel like this sense of curiosity and aliveness about us, or if it's contracting. And if we feel ourselves kind of move into like, I need to hide here and not speak up and not show up. And there becomes this sort of sense of timidity and unworthiness sometimes. So it happens here in our bodies. And if that's the place we go, where we put on our armor, then that's the cue. Okay, I need to move into strengths-based coaching myself here.
Mm-hmm.
Hang on a second. If we're already in that, I think that Jen, and maybe I misspoke there, she came up to me, eyes wide open, like, help me understand, like, when I'm in this situation and I'm moving into it with this sort of a mindset, what should I do instead? Maybe it wasn't negative.
Mm-hmm.
But she knew in that moment that there was something she could be doing more effectively and better. And so it was that kind of dissonance, we'll say dissonance, in that place where what she wanted to do as an action wasn't aligning with how she was feeling or thinking about it. Does that
Which makes a lot of sense, because she is about as most positive a person as I think you could ever be around. She's just, I've never seen somebody get so excited about expressing to somebody else their strengths.
Mm-hmm.
And everything is like, oh my gosh, this is going to be the best thing in the world, and you're the best at this, and it's so genuine. You can tell that's just who she is. So
I totally agree with you, Joe. And she's in a position, and I may be making a massive assumption here. Her being a medical doctor, she's in a position where she doesn't have much time day to day with people to be able to express those sorts of things to them. It's quick hitting, like, here's what I would recommend sort of things, instead of, and being able to actually sit down with them and absorb the energy and the strengths that she can eventually say to them, look, here's what I see, it's beautiful, and I think, if you capitalize on these things, we could really be moving forward in a positive direction. So that's one of her strengths. She is a masterful strengths extractor.
I am studying her intently, because she fascinates me in that regard. It's just who she is. And it's not only attractive, it changes the entire space around her in another person's life, in an entire room. I even asked her at dinner that night, is that something that's very intentional? And she said, probably somewhat because of the need as a medical doctor, but clearly it's something that is just part of who she is. So one of the things I'd like to do to wrap up this podcast, Kori, is explain a little bit how we can all get just a taste on a daily basis, the awesomeness that we provide in one of our sessions at our annual conferences every year. And, my thanks to you, and always wanting to do some kind of a group building exercise. And this year you chose to do something where you gave everybody in the conference the name of another person at the conference, and you said you have to just observe them for the next couple days and then list a couple strengths that you see in them. So you don't know who's watching you, and you may not even know the person you're supposed to be kind of trolling, but the goal is to, as you said, extract some of that information. And then we sat in a conference room, and with 40, 45, 50 people, it was like a group therapy session with hugs and crying and all this fantastic stuff. But it's just simply hearing somebody else affirm the best qualities that you already have, but we often don't hear that. I mean, certainly not enough. So how can we do that in daily life when we need it? I mean, obviously we can do it for other people, but how do we just be better humans in this regard?
Well, I think it does need to become a deliberate practice for ourselves. If we want to get better at something, we need to do more of that something, right? It becomes a literal practice. We practice the practice. And so to make it very conscious for us, we can say to ourselves, I'm going to sit down at the end of the day and ask myself what I did well. What were the strengths that I used? There are 24 research-based character strengths. And so I would recommend that everyone become very acquainted with what those are and what they mean. And even throughout the day, ask and reflect upon how we're actively using them. Each person has 5 what are called signature strengths that we use almost automatically because they come very, very naturally to us. And we really would, without those, feel kind of lost in the world. But so to understand what those are for us, and every time I've had any of my clients or anyone do, there is a formal assessment that people can take. If they Google 24 character strengths, you'll find the assessment. It's a VIA survey of character strengths, but every time I've had anyone take that, the top 5 haven't necessarily surprised them. What does surprise them is that the entire list of 24 are strengths. Even if number 24 is number 24 at the very bottom, it's not a weakness. It's a strength they have. They're just not maybe necessarily deliberately trying to use it. And maybe they don't even know that it exists and that it can be deliberately implemented in their lives. So make it a practice. Sit down at the end of the day after you found out what the strengths are. Ask yourself, which have I used? Start watching the people around you and identifying the strengths that they're using. And maybe ask yourself, is there something about that person that I would really appreciate having more of myself? You know, I watched people throughout these 2 days, and I thought, man, I really admire and appreciate that about that person. I would like more of that. I want to capitalize on that. So, and not from a deficit standpoint, but that's amazing. I could do so much if I deliberately had more of that in my life.
Mm-hmm. All right, guys. So you heard it right from the expert, Dr. Kori Propst, health psychologist, and those assessments she mentioned. If you want to dig deeper into that, Doctors Seligman and Peterson, who I believe are from University of Pennsylvania, pretty much the founders of positive psychology and looking into a whole new branch of personality psychology. Just phenomenal stuff. There are some assessments you can take online by looking that up. I'm sure they have YouTube videos and maybe even TED Talks out there. But from Dr. Kori and I just want to make sure you guys just really go out there and look at those strengths in other people, see what you want to embody, and then be that for everybody else, because it'll absolutely change the world one day at a time. So Kori, thank you for that. At an incredible annual conference again, already planning some good stuff for next year. And if you guys don't mind liking, sharing, getting our podcast out there in front of more people, we're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, of course, all the channels. Our podcasts are on SoundCloud, soon to be on iTunes. So we're going to keep rolling along this week and reporting on our annual conference.
Thank you, guys.